Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is the Good Death Book, the virtual book tour in conversations we have with wonderful people. We have today a very special guest, and it's in a very exciting topic, one that is really dear to my heart for multiple reasons, which we will explain and talk about in this podcast. So, I want to welcome our guest. This is Christine Caldwell. She's a founder of End of Life Psychedelic Care, a nonprofit based on the principle that safe and supported psychedelic care can help transform the death and dying journey. She is the co chair for the Dying Well Initiative, a part of the Global Wellness Institute, and a graduate of the Psychedelics Today Vital Therapies and Integration Program. Christine is also the former owner of a Sarasota-based 250 client home health care agency. Welcome, Christine.
Hey, Suzanne, it's really exciting to be here to talk with you about your book.
Well, thank you. This is long overdue. I have known you, followed you, talked with you. It's just a matter of time before we got on here and did a podcast, and who knows what else that we're going to do. You are so passionate in this space. You are so knowledgeable in this space. So I am thrilled to share you with our listeners and to ask you some questions and go from there. I do want to share the piece in the book. So, yes, this is a Good Death virtual book tour because we are shifting the culture with everything end of life. And when we do that, we shift the culture of life, right? They're not exclusive. There's just a win, win, win. It's like a rainbow of wins across the board. But I do want to start out because this is going to lead us into the conversation, if I may. On page 31 of the Good Death book, I write about the groundbreaking research into psychedelics. And I'm going to read this paragraph verbatim. Contrary to what some people think, psychedelic medications do not lead to addiction or dependency. A 2020 article in Scientific America reported the following. Scientists are rediscovering what many see as the substance's astonishing therapeutic potential for a vast range of issues, from depression to drug addiction and acceptance of mortality. A great deal of research was conducted on these substances in the 1950s and 1960s, but then they got an unfounded reputation as dangerous and were banned. Let's just start with that. So I feel like that's a good lead in to what we're going to talk about. So first, I'd like to ask you, how did you find yourself in this pathway to working with psychedelics? Because this is feels like this is your thing.
I know that's what's kind of funny. If you'd asked me 6 years ago, it would have been no way. But if I could start back, I'll make this really quick.
Yeah.
So, really, in starting a meditative practice about 30 years ago, and I'm not a regular meditator, but I do understand and I do sit down and I'm quiet, in contemplative. So, I think in anybody who meditates, you understand you're more than your physical self. There's more out there. And, meditation leads a lot of people to an altered state of consciousness. Rather, we don't need psychedelics to do it. But then fast forward, and I started to read everything I could about quantum mechanics. And it's like, yeah, this seems like a no-brainer to me. It's all woven together. I think there will be a consciousness field every bit the same as a gravitational field. And then, yes, I owned the home healthcare agency, which really launched me on taking care of, caring about older adults,
Mm-hmm.
seeing many of them pass away. And then when I started to study psychedelics in 2020, it sort of became a no-brainer. And it was my son who got me involved in it. He just kept saying, "You've got to look at this. You got to look at it." He wanted me to come down to Ecuador for an ayahuasca trip, but I didn't. But setting that aside, once I started to study psychedelics and experimented a little myself, I realized psychedelics are a portal. I mean, there's no question. They are a portal into the consciousness. So, yes. And so then when I started to take this training through Psychedelics Today, I kept meeting people in your business, end of life doulas, hospice nurses, hospice physicians. And given my background in business, it was like, I know what I'm going to do. So that's how I got here. But fundamentally, I knew that psychedelics could hold a key. There's the Brian Maruski's book, The Immortality Key, about this very same thing. That it's what I had to do.
All right, I love it. So we could do the whole podcast on what you asking questions and dissecting what you just shared. So you're working with elders You're finding yourself in that space, and then meditation is the doorway in, as far as I'm concerned, right? If people want to know the doorway in, that's one of the main ones. And again, you don't have to do anything but sit quietly.
Yeah.
But when you experience the more that we are, right? There's a peace to that. There's an excitement to that. There's just it's beautiful. And now your son, I love because there's no accidents, is talking to you about this. And then you go to a retreat, and you find hospice nurses and death doulas there. And of course, because death right now is the number one fear in the world, and that in and of itself is the question mark, how did it get there to be a fear? But it's a palpable fear. If I may, from my background as a hospice nurse and oncology nurse, the fear is palpable, and it's making people make poor choices, and it's making people not live fully, and all the things that goes with that. So I love that you found, yes. So then you were like, this is what I'm called to do. And I love that. Okay, let's go back, if we could, for a minute. Quantum mechanics, you mentioned. Can you define that? Give our listeners a little definition about that.
Well, that basically helps us understand what the totality of the universe is made up of. So, how far do you want to go down to quarks and neutrinos? So there's fundamental building blocks that are tiny, 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 that make up everything.
So science is supporting this all right now. So the science of physics and science of quantum physics, it's beautiful. So there is a lot of validity
But
within.
Well, I'm not saying every physicist is going to agree with that. I loved many of your readers might have heard of Greg Braden and the Divine
Of
Matrix. He speaks
course.
to this as well. So, yeah, there are people. Hey, I'm a layperson. I'm not a physicist, but it certainly makes sense that if these are the building blocks and they act in quantum fashion, which is all probabilities, then yeah, it makes sense.
Of course it does. And I think that, we learned this in fifth grade, that, energy is matter, and matter, I mean, energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form, right? So it has to be a solid, liquid, or a gas, and it can't just disappear. And so I love that there is, ways that they can measure energy and frequency and waves and all of that. So that's just a beautiful area. Now let's talk about the studies in the 1950s and 1960s, if we may. And I want to do that without too much judgment. What happened there? So they were finding great things, just like we're finding now, about all of the benefits, right? About the breaking open of consciousness, and we'll talk about what actually happens in a little bit. But what happened there, and why do you think that those got halted so quickly, those studies?
Well, we can fast forward to 1969, 1970, when then the Controlled Substance Act was put into place, and these drugs of no medical value were put into Schedule One. But the 50s and 60s was a great era, a great time of experimentation. As it relates to end of life, though, it was only LSD. So LSD is what was used, and I think they used it in Spring Grove in Maryland. Bill Richards, Stan Groff were in the forefront of looking at this. And yes, they found that it helped overcome the fear of dying. Clearly, death anxiety, whatever you want to call it. Then when the war on drugs was called, then all of the research stopped. If not immediately, then within a few years after the funding ran out. So it didn't get taken back up again until the 90s. But so remember, so that was LSD. And they did a lot. Remember Cary Grant? That's the famous story. I mean, there were a lot of celebrities, right, that used LSD for depression. But then when we came back and started slowly in the 90s, it was in the early 2000s that UCLA, followed by Johns Hopkins and NYU, started to look at psilocybin, in this case, in the context of cancer patients.
Mhm.
And UCLA and Charles Grove was really the first. It was a
Mhm.
small study that wanted to show its safety profile and its efficacy, only 12 participants. But then, it went on from there. And really, when we think about those trailblazers like Charles Grove, Roland Griffiths, who recently passed, Bill Richards, and then at NYU, Stephen Ross and Tony Bossis, giving a shout out to all of those people because of the pioneering work that they did. What
Mhm.
was interesting to me, though, it then I don't say it went quiet, but people learned quickly that the FDA was not going to approve psilocybin for end of life. It was just
Why?
too small of a niche. It was just not the kind of thing they wanted to do. So a lot of the research then, and you saw this, began to shift to depression and anxiety. Now, of course, it's opened up, and we're only talking about psilocybin right now. So that that lasted a while. Now, there were a couple of studies in there. University of Utah did a small study. And the one I like to talk a lot about is sunstone therapies. So Manish Agarwal is an oncologist in Rockville, Maryland, and he's done several studies. But the one that I often talk about is he did the primary endpoint of psilocybin looking at depression, same kinds of results. 80% of the people reported significant reductions in depression. But 18 months later, after a single dose of psilocybin and the associated psychotherapy, at the time, it's not necessary that they went on and had psychotherapy for 18 months, then there were 64% of the people reporting significant reductions and 57% in remission. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Yeah,
One
it is phenomenal.
psilocybin session.
Yeah, it's
So,
phenomenal.
but just so say real quick, fast forward to today, and the field is exploding.
Mhm.
I talk about these things all the time, and there are at least 12 psilocybin studies, at least, either in the planning phases or in the recruitment phase. And that's just psilocybin. I also talk about MDMA because of its potential. There was one study done, I think published in 2019, with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Sciences, and UCSF. Again, a small study, 19 participants showed reductions in anxiety, not significant because there was an outlier. But they showed a few years later, they did a qualitative study, resilience. And you can obviously speak to this, the resilience to handle adversity in your life. These were people, some of them with advanced stage cancer. So, it speaks for itself. And so that's MDMA. And so the researchers stay away from LSD most of the time, especially in this population, because of the length of the journey. Psilocybin and LSD, both as classical psychedelics, then they're sort of similar in their mechanism of action, not totally similar, but similar. So they look at that. But there is an LSD microdosing study in cancer patients going on in Australia.
Okay, so let's talk about the mechanism of action if we can, on the brain. And so let's start with psilocybin because you said they don't exactly mimic each other, but they do. They're related.
Yeah.
Can you explain what is happening or what have we found? What are the studies found is happening inside the brain? I assume they're taking imagery and seeing if there is actually changes lighting up in different places.
There's several theories, and a lot of this work came out of Robin Carhart Harris, his lab at Imperial College of London, and he's continuing to do some work at UCSF, but most of this came out of Imperial College of London. So among others, so let's say there's at least three different theories. One is this idea of quieting the default mode network.
Mhm.
So it's a network in the brain made up of three regions, the largest one being your prefrontal cortex.
Mhm.
So, as you would know as a nurse, and we all should know, for those of us who have anxiety or ruminating thoughts or depression, that default mode network is overactive.
Mhm.
So the theory is if you can quiet that default mode network and get on top of that. And that's certainly, I certainly saw that happen with myself, ruminating thoughts that was very hard to control. Once you get on top of your ruminating thoughts, then you can actually better manage your depression and anxiety. So that's the DMN theory. One of the other theories is it's opening the social reward critical period. So, as we're all little toddlers, all little kids, our ability to learn things, as we know, is phenomenal. And we all wish at our age that we could still do that, right?
Mhm.
So, they found that this opening of the social reward critical period gave rise to an ability to learn new thought and behavior patterns and embody them. And that there was a correlation between, I'll call it the subjective or acute effects of the medicine. So the length, um, basically the length of the journey with how long that social reward period stayed open.
Hmm.
So ketamine is like one of the shortest. Then, that period may only be 72 hours or maybe a week. I forget what it said exactly. But with psilocybin and LSD, or no, excuse me, psilocybin and MDMA, it was more like 3 weeks. LSD was more like 4 weeks. And ibogaine, because that journey can last 24 more hours, that one's out there, that maybe that's 6 weeks. I'd have to look at the chart again, but the point is that it's correlated to the length of the journey. So there's that. And then the third sort of theory is this global connectivity. And we always show this one graphic that's so beautiful. It shows like a circle, and it's the circle on the left is without psilocybin, and it shows the connections, which generally speaking stay within the regions of which a brain operates. So maybe it stays within the visual cortex, or it only communicates with something that it needs to communicate with. But then when they did the same illustration with some fancy technology and they looked at it, those communication pathways went all over the place. And so the belief there is that it brings flexibility, and again, that ability to look at things in a new way and then learn new thought and behavior patterns out of that. So that's the essence of the neuroscience.
Okay, I want to stay there for a little bit if I can, because I think this is so important for people to hear because it does affect the brain. And I feel like there's two things happening at once. I feel like it's quieting the default and it's opening up the part of us of the consciousness.
Sort of paradoxical.
Yes, this is what patients are reporting. These are the studies that are coming out, that what they're, talking about, that there is all of a sudden that they're saying that there is no death, that it's all about unconditional love. The same reports are coming out in these studies. And I think, again, Anthony Bossis is a great, passionate advocate in this space. This is life-changing information. So so I want to hone in on that because there is, in my experience, and I've been honored and blessed to be with over 1,000 people at the end of life. There is something that happens towards the very end of life, and this is what I think is happening. As people's spiritual bodies are diminishing, I'm sorry, their physical is diminishing, their spiritual body's growing. And there's one point in that journey that they get what I call their spiritual eyes. And they say the same things as people are saying in the studies of psilocybin without psilocybin, right? So it makes sense that as we're dropping the human ego and all of this and getting back to those connectors of connecting, that we're all connected. And then the same reports are from near-death experiences, that the same similarities of all, I mean, this is major what is happening. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather do psilocybin than have a near-death experience. So, and you get some of the same
Well, of
benefits,
course, and
right?
I'd rather not wait till I get to the end of the journey to have these awakenings so that I
This,
can really live my purpose and enjoy, the
but
beauty
you
of
do
this.
remind me of something, and that is very often what we talk about is psychedelics not only are not for everybody, they're also not for everybody at certain stages of their lives. And we do talk about the veil thinning, and we talk about exactly the same thing that you just said, and then maybe psychedelics should be replaced by something else. After all, the aim is a good death. The aim isn't psychedelics. So if you can help that client, and I'm sure you teach this in your doula courses, let's do some meditative practices. Hospices are training Reiki masters. And so there's so much we can do for a client outside of psychedelics, especially when they get to that point. I will say though, I since I have the good fortune of talking to hundreds of people who do this work, people they're like all over the map, and a lot has to do with what they're comfortable with and their experience. Some people will work with clients very close to the end of life. So one of the things that I do is I really more focus on the real world. So you'll see any of my courses, they're taught by people who are doing the work, and we're giving them the practical skills of what it means to work with somebody with psychedelics at the end of life. So yeah, the stories that they tell that can bring peace when they do work with psychedelics at the end of life. And it may not be psilocybin. We have people who work with ketamine, also 5-MeO DMT, and MDMA. MDMA, we say don't do really close to the end of life, because of its impact on the heart. I mean, the MDMA, the MA is methamphetamine, so it can really increase the heart rate and blood pressure. So we stay away from that. But anyway, 5-MeO DMT, although a potent drug that can put you into oneness of the universe just like that, is also pretty dangerous. So you need somebody who knows what they're doing, and it's got to be really, really, really low doses. But the point is that, yeah, we're all cognizant. Anybody who works in this field
Mm-hmm.
understands that there is that shift. Body becomes frailer. And
Mm-hmm.
I use the word ethereal. I liked how you described it too, but the veil thins. And you remind me of a lot of things I'd like to comment on. One of the reasons why I founded this nonprofit was because of end of life doulas. I knew as soon as I started to
Mm-hmm.
talk to end of life doulas,
Yeah.
hospice nurses, hospice chaplains, that first of all, you always come away with this sense of zen and calm. There's just something. I know that you guys can handle anything. I had these conversations over the last couple of days quite a few times about, yeah, I love working with these folks because they strip away everything that doesn't matter to the essence. You get to the essence and you can handle anything. You're the best people to sit with somebody in a psychedelic journey. And I knew that was going to be a core focus for my nonprofit. So one of the things I try to do, not just educate, that's huge. Education is first and foremost, but connect. So I have the only practitioners directory that has practitioners that are both experienced both psychedelic care and end of life. So doulas, chaplains, hospice nurses, hospice social workers. So I just felt it was really important. And I also just had the really good fortune of teaming up with the University of Chicago researcher,
Mm-hmm.
where we had a psychedelic death worker project, and we finished the survey, 100 responses in the survey. And I've just been doing the analysis and writing up a report. So of the 100 responses, 43 were end of life doulas.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of self-selected because it goes out to my network, but nonetheless, it just shows you who's doing the work. And hospice and ER physicians, it's always interesting. Our palliative care and ER physicians do a lot of this work as well. So it was a matter of saying, yeah, you need to be a part of this, because I think you're like, I try not to say the best too much because I can aggravate other people, but yeah, doulas and this work, that's like,
Well, here's what I think, is happening is because, and this is the way it is right now, death is the number one fear. People are coming on hospice services very late. Doctors are calling it very late. They're not trained in end of life to have the conversation. We're running in the opposite direction in all ways. And then when we get there, the fear that the families have, the fear that the person has, and many times that fear completely hijacks the situation and blocks it from even learning how to care for your loved one or having the final conversation or being physically present and just that fear for so many is so unfortunate to bear witness to. But because we don't talk about it this whole way, it shows up, people panic, they're dying. It's a very unhealthy relationship we have with this very natural, sacred part of life. And the doulas and the hospice nurses are the ones that are showing up to serve in that space. And it's really difficult to do that because if we had more time and if we had the conversation and people planned ahead, that would be completely different. It would be a spiritual ceremony of transition, which is my goal, to bring that back to the
mm,
natural sacred, right? We lost our way. That's, albeit it is hard to say goodbye to somebody. However, it can be as beautiful as you can only imagine, helping somebody leave this world in comfort, in that energy. And so right now, you're right. It's very difficult. medicine can help to facilitate a consciousness quickly. But what I'll also say is that we've got to remember that there are certain populations that have extremely difficult processes with death, like veterans, and just different people with extreme fear in that space. And this could be everything for those journeys.
Right, right. Anybody for that matter.
Mhm.
But, we talked about the neuroscience, and I could be wrong, but let me preface that by saying, one of the things I noticed was that the results from those studies I cited earlier are some of the best results across the board, the different types of conditions that we've seen in using psychedelic therapy. I think it's because of the spirituality component. And so, one of the things I've never read, which there could be out there, is all right. So, we talked about all this neuroscience, but I think it's the spirituality, the individuals going into this, going, I want to be open, I want to be receptive
Mhm.
to what may be there because they want to lose their fear of death. So
Mhm.
what is it that's out there? And this is where they gain that peace, they gain that purposeful living, they
Mhm.
gain some amount of control, because this is a whole other thing. When you say the loved ones want to do for them, and the person is losing control of everything, and that just makes a lot of things worse, and the family dynamics and everything like that. But I think it's that ability to come to terms with your death and dying, and see that there's something else than just his physical body. And I don't care if you don't have spiritual beliefs that you can hang a hat on. It's more like I'm sitting looking at this gorgeous, like nature outside my window here in Ashland, Oregon. And so we know that there's something more than us in this world. And
Mhm.
that's what it is that brings these folks comfort. Now there are people, there's oh my gosh, there's this video recording I did with Thomas Hartle, the first Canadian to receive psilocybin therapy through Health Canada. He did 7 journeys before he passed,
Mm.
and he started with managing his debilitating anxiety. He was diagnosed stage 4 colon cancer in 2016. So 2020, he was able to finally do a psilocybin journey. And yeah, it managed his debilitating anxiety so he can again be present for his family. But he didn't stop there. He had the good fortune to continue, to have these psilocybin journeys, and began really almost like a Maslow's hierarchy, begin to come up that pyramid and
Mhm.
get to full consciousness, where he actually had a conversation with his cancer. And his cancer said, do you think I want to be here? I don't want to be here. So he understood that his cancer was consciousness as much as everything around us, him was
Mhm.
consciousness. And he
Powerful.
called it almost me. So that's what psilocybin can do, is help you not just lose that fear of death. Some people go over to the other side. And part of this is who are we to tell somebody no, that's not real? I mean, that's just like the end of life experiences that you're really familiar with, the deathbed visions and the conversations with our
Oh,
loved
they're
ones
real. Oh,
past.
they are real, real, real.
They're real. Yes, exactly. So are these
Yeah.
psychedelic journeys, which are
Yeah.
taking you into these different realms.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact again that people who've died, clinically died, and come back, what they say. I love the studies of psilocybin. We'll just use that one right now. And I love what I'm seeing at the bedside as people get really close. They're all saying the same things about what they're feeling and experiencing, and it's so incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, we
So,
say
yeah,
all death work is psychedelic. All psychedelics are death work,
I love that. I love that. That's so fun. All
because
right.
it goes to what you've said. I know you've talked about the life, to die well, live well to die well. You didn't say it that way, but it's like by overcoming our fear of death, we can live better lives.
It's the only way to really embrace this journey is to realize the fragility of it, right? The gift of it, that one day it will not be the way I know it today. And that can mean many different things, but also I don't know when that day is. So I live today like one little lifetime. I live it very, very presently in gratitude. Like, don't sweat the small stuff. And that is because I see life ending in this experience for people all the time. And the number one thing they say is, I thought I had more time and I didn't fully live. And so this is a gift, but I think also the common things that people at the end of life say about non-judgment and that we're all connected and that it's all about unconditional love are the universal laws that we need to get back to, that we're all connected to the planet and to the animals and to each other. Because if we embodied that, we would be living a very different existence together in this thing called humanity. And I think we're headed there, although growth is painful, and that's besides the point, but we are. And this is a big help. So what can people do if they'd like to find out more about using having this as medicine for them, if they're at the end of life, or if they want to get they're interested in becoming practitioners of it? Where can they go?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure we clarify end of life. I called my nonprofit End of Life Psychedelic Care. I struggled with what it should be called, but we are technically talking about anybody who's facing a terminal or life-threatening illness and begins to really experience that death anxiety, right? Um, so basically, there's a lot of information on my website right now. I have a lot of videos I've recorded about, there's with Thomas Hartle, for example, with end of life doula Mary Taliano, for example, she has sat with over 200 people in a psychedelic ceremony, and then one on microdosing. So there's a lot there already. I give free workshops all the time. I'm pretty sure I've told you I would love to do a free workshop for, your students. And so that's huge. So on the professional side, that for sure. On the client side, those same recordings. Plus, I always add more. I have to add some some right now, but I do like 14 free online events a year. So, there'll be more coming up. And then the connector directory, I call it, is on the website. If anybody wants to even just talk with somebody who's very well experienced in end of life and psychedelic care, then that directory is there. They can always reach out to me to ask questions. And then the paid for courses, what I've done as a nonprofit, I wanted to keep everything as low as possible. And these courses augment what's already out there. I'm not replicating like the kind of psychedelic training course I took. So we dig deep. We're in the middle of our psychedelic core course right now. And today's course was on spirituality, psychedelic integration at end of life. And next week will be one on grief. The week after that, we'll do one on these screening essentials. So, what are the considerations for health considerations, drug interactions, for working with people in palliative and end of life care. So we have this core course, but then we and they're not like, you don't have to take all of these courses. Then we have separate like 3-session courses where we dive deep. Like we just did one on integrative practices, where we talked about meditation, we talked about guided visualizations, we talked
Mhm.
about supportive touch and somatic techniques, all as it relates to supporting psychedelics at end of life. So that's what we do, and building community then within our membership so that they can sort of learn from each other as well.
Beautiful. And if somebody listening today has a loved one that is at the end of life and is panicking and having all of this trauma, let's just use that example, they can go to your directory and find a practitioner in their area. Is that the best thing for them to do?
They can start there, and then if they don't see anybody that either resonates or is in their area, then they can definitely reach out to me. My contact information, well, there's contact forms on the website there. And then also they can check out the Journey Circle. So this is an online discussion group for anybody who is faced with a terminal or life-threatening illness
Oh, beautiful.
and is curious about or has participated in psychedelic journeys and wants a really safe place to explore that, to discuss
The
what's
journey
happened. So
circles? Okay.
so that as well. But I would also say anybody should watch that Thomas Hartle video. They'll get such an enlightened view. It'll
Okay.
make you cry, but it'll give you an enlightened view of one man's journey with psilocybin.
Well, that's what I was going to ask as we wrap up. Do you have a story that you would like to share or that you could share with our listeners that really gives a great example of the possibilities?
Oh gosh, I have so many stories. But I'm gonna share a story about ketamine because it's just so illustrative to me of this is at the very end of life. And we say don't wait, but nonetheless, this gentleman had advanced stage ALS
Hmm.
and he was max assist. And there's a palliative care physician who does at-home ketamine because it's something else that I'd like people to know about. Ketamine is legal everywhere, and psilocybin is not.
Okay.
So this palliative care physician goes into the home, and what was so cool about this program pilot that we did, Suzanne, was that we paired an end-of-life doula with him, and this is the model we wanted to pilot. So she was Ruth, not Ruth, Susie Ruth. So Susie did the initial intake. She did all the preparation. She built that trust, that rapport. The doc is great.
Is that Dr. Michael Fratkin or no? Okay, and that just came to me. Okay, because of, okay, go ahead. This is how the universe works, everyone. It just,
It
all these beautiful alignments happen. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And so Susie was there when he administered ketamine. It was intramuscular injection. And he typically does 3 sessions a week apart. Well, he only was able to do 2 sessions, and then the gentleman passed peacefully in his sleep. But what it brought was such peace and comfort. His very first session, he was playing with his children. Now, this man whose physical body just was
Hmm.
destroyed and let him down, right? He played with his children, running and jumping, and that brought him such joy. The second session, he expressed gratitude. He understood that he was grateful for his life.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
even that close to the end, it brought him that level of peace.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Do you know that nurse is a graduate of Doula Givers Institute?
Which who?
Susan.
Oh, this is Susie Ruth.
Yeah. That's what I believe she reached out and she's working with Dr. Michael Fratkin and she wrote me a beautiful letter and she works close with him, yes, for a while now
Oh,
on this ketamine. That's what she,
I'm sorry that. Yeah. I knew that. Oh my God, I knew that.
that's okay. But it's what a beautiful, small universe and world this is. Go ahead. You're getting
Okay,
all
no,
excited.
okay, then we
Yes.
royal we have to put this on somewhere on your website. She's got to write up a thing for you. How cool
Yes,
is
she's a
that?
lovely, she wrote me a lovely, lovely email talking about working with Dr. Michael Fratkin, talking about this course, what it has. I mean, it's just a beautiful, it's such an honor and a privilege when you just show up for what you're supposed to be doing and the ripple effects that it has in the world. And it's such a
Yeah.
small world. So, yes, we will go back to that. Yes, go back to that. But thank you for that story. And it gives me chills because deep, deep peace is what people describe in this space when they find it, no matter what their circumstances. And it just makes me, I just want to, if I may, there was this woman when I was a very young hospice nurse, very new. By the way, they gave me no end of life training, and I had no end of life training. They taught me about the medications, but they kind of sent me out and said, if something comes up, let us know. And I went to see this woman with ALS, and she was, probably 42, and she was all paralyzed on the couch with her head propped up with a pillow because she couldn't do anything. She was all paralyzed. She was beautiful, long brown hair. And I remember her daughter was coming in and out of the house, slamming the door, just angry. I get that, 17 years old. And at one point, this woman's head fell off the pillow and it was dangling like a rag doll. And I remember I was petrified. I was this young hospice nurse. She couldn't speak. And I just said, and I came over gently and said, can I pick your head up? And this woman was beaming a smile at me of love. She was caring for me. She could tell how scared I was, and she was so beautiful and smile. And I thought at that time, Christine, I said, how can this woman be smiling like this when she's paralyzed? She's 42, she's dying, the whole thing. And now I understand
Mm.
because she got to that place of being able to access whatever it is, that peace or where it is. And that's what ketamine, the psilocybin can provide people. Because sometimes we can't get there on our own. There's no time to get there on our own. So I feel like this is the beginning of a lot of work we're going to do moving forward, you
Well,
and I, and all of this. So it's so exciting to have you here.
yeah, loved it. Loved it.
Yeah.
I want, hey, just share one other quick thing about Susie
Yeah.
that I'm assuming she told Michael, I don't know. But one of the cool things about pairing an end of life doula with the physician was, and Michael is like amazing man. But when he left the room, left the home, that man let his hair down for Susie.
Of course.
And yeah,
Of course.
they built this relationship, and it wouldn't have been the same if it was just Michael
Yeah. And that's the truth. And so, I mean,
as a physician.
that's a very important time is the best medicine we have to provide at end of life, end in life. And the fact that doulas and doula givers have no time restrictions, that they can build that relationship, that is everything for somebody to just know that they can be themselves, they can share what's on their mind, and they're being held in this non-judgmental, loving space that doulas really provide. It's just amazing. But it is that time that's needed. And that's where that big gap and rub for me as a hospice nurse running in and out, it's not working. It doesn't work for multiple reasons, but it's that presence, that's compassionate, loving presence and holding space, not just for that person, but for the family is the magic in this sacred transition that we have. We're providing that with all the tools that are coming about. It's just amazing. So the world is an exciting, beautiful place. And I want to thank you for doing so much in this space because it's really exciting and we're just getting started. So much more to come on that. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close out?
No,
I think you said it.
I'm good. I'll think of something later, but no, I'm good
That's
now.
okay. We'll put all your information below that people can get in touch with you. And again, I want to thank you so much for being on the Good Death Book. This is the virtual tour. We are in conversations with amazing people working in this space. And Christine Caldwell, you are doing just that. So thank you and to be continued.
Thank you, Suzanne. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. Put your questions below. We'll be sure to answer each and every one of them. And more to come. We'll see you in the next interview.